On September 1st, 1943, at Rabaul Airfield on the island of New Britain, Lieutenant Colonel Saburo Sakai, one of the Imperial Japanese Navy's most skilled pilots, sat in the operations tent, his hand pausing on the latest intelligence report. Sakai's eyes, already injured, one lost, the other still clear, scanned each line of italicized text, every number he had just received. The air inside the tent was hot and humid, sweat clinging to his brow. Yet Sakai's smile was unaffected by the heat. He laughed heartily. Before him lay information about a new American aircraft, described as a super fighter set to appear in the Pacific Theater. But from his preliminary assessment, Sakai saw nothing to be concerned about. "Hellcat, huh?" he murmured. "Just a lumbering machine, heavy as a bomber, clumsy as a transport plane. It could never match a Zero." Soft laughter from other pilots drifted through the tent flaps, mingling with the whistle of wind through the openings. They regarded the intelligence report as a joke. Indeed, over the past 2 years, the Mitsubishi A6M Zero had proven itself absolute in the skies of the Pacific. No Allied aircraft, whether the British Hurricane, the American P-40, or the Dutch Brewster Buffalo, had stood a chance against the Zero's power. From Pearl Harbor to Darwin, from the Philippines to the Dutch East Indies, Zeros had dominated every opponent, racking up astonishing kill ratios: 29 lost at Pearl Harbor while destroying 347 targets, 7 in the Philippines against 103 enemy aircraft, and 2 at Darwin versus 30 enemy planes destroyed. Sakai glanced around the tent where pilots were preparing for the morning briefing. They stood beside gleaming A6M Zeros lined up on the perforated steel floor, sunlight glinting off their sharp wings, reflecting cold metallic brilliance. The Zero, feather-light, agile, and incredibly maneuverable, embodied Japan's fighter design philosophy: every ounce of weight devoted to performance, nearly no protective armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, sometimes even no radio to save weight. Each Zero was a perfect machine, flying as if it were an extension of the pilot's body, responding to thought, not just controls. Meanwhile, the intelligence on the F6F Hellcat made Sakai chuckle. According to the report, this aircraft weighed 12,186 pounds fully loaded, more than twice a Zero, had wide but short wings relative to its fuselage, pilot armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, bulletproof glass, and 6 Browning M2 machine guns, each firing 750 rounds per minute. To Sakai and his fellow Japanese pilots, this was a design that went against every principle they had learned. An elephant trying to be a bird, Sakai thought to himself. Japanese experts at the Combined Fleet Headquarters, including Captain Minoru Genda, Pearl Harbor's former tactical planner, also reviewed the report and declared, "The Americans haven't learned from their past failures. The Hellcat is just a continuation of a flawed philosophy, using heavy machinery to compensate for pilot skill." Technical data seemed to reinforce this view. The Zero's wing loading was 22 pounds per square foot, allowing extremely tight turns, whereas the Hellcat, at 36.5 pounds per square foot, would have a turning radius over 900 feet, putting it at a complete disadvantage in dogfights, a tactic central to Japanese pilots. Sakai raised an eyebrow, confident that any Japanese Navy pilot could turn circles around a Hellcat without difficulty. This confidence was not merely based on feeling. From 1941 to 1943, Japan had faced almost no worthy adversary. Legendary pilots such as Hiroyoshi Nishiwa, who would become an ace with 87 confirmed kills, described the Zero: "Flying a Zero is like wearing wings, responding to thought rather than just controls. American planes fly like trucks, powerful but clumsy. They build planes like they build cars, heavy, redundant, wasteful." Yet what Sakai and his comrades did not realize was that the Hellcat was not designed to fly like a Zero. It did not need superior maneuverability. The American aircraft was built on a different philosophy: speed, altitude, and pilot-protecting firepower, combined with coordinated formations and radar guidance from ships. Sakai looked around the airfield. Young, confident pilots trusted their individual skills. They were accustomed to dominating the skies through the Zero's exceptional turning ability, instinct, and courage. They could not imagine that a clunky, heavy aircraft like the Hellcat could shatter all the assumptions they had once considered invincible. He drew a long breath, still smirking. Within weeks, that laughter would quickly turn into the final letters sent home. The fears faced when confronting a power they had never seen. Japanese naval tactics, individual skill, and pride would be severely tested, and the harsh lesson would come from a plane they had once dismissed. In the remaining days of September, as pilots prepared for reconnaissance and patrol missions, the Hellcat began appearing in the skies. Though not yet engaged in combat, its presence created an invisible threat. Before them lay a new era of aerial warfare, where intellect, engineering, and industry would defeat the personal courage and piloting skill that had once made the Zero legendary. Young pilots looked at each other, joking about the intelligence report, none truly worried. Their faith in the Zero, in themselves, was too strong. Yet it was precisely this confidence, combined with the misjudgment of the Hellcat, that would plunge the Japanese Navy into an unprecedented crisis, where upcoming battles would not only be tests of skill and wits, but wars of systems, industry, and a nation capable of waging war in ways Japan had never imagined. At the end of September 1943, the sky over Marcus Island blazed with sunlight, not a cloud in sight. Yet this serenity set the stage for an encounter that Japanese pilots would never forget. Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui, a young pilot in the Imperial Japanese Navy, was tasked with escorting a reconnaissance squadron in the air. Like many of his comrades, Fukui carried the confidence of a Zero pilot, spreading his wings with the speed and maneuverability that had earned them their reputation across the Pacific. As they flew at medium altitude, Fukui suddenly spotted a group of dark shapes approaching from the southeast. 6 deep blue silhouettes climbed toward them. At first, he wondered, are these B-25s conducting reconnaissance or an attack? But as they drew closer, the forms revealed strange features. A large fuselage, short wings relative to the body, and a weighty appearance unlike any aircraft Fukui had ever faced. It was the first time he had seen an F6F Hellcat. Fukui studied it closely, comparing it to the familiar Zeros. A single engine, bulky frame, but oddly unlike anything Japanese pilots had learned about American fighters. Previously, they were used to American planes being weakly maneuverable, clumsy, and easily lured into dogfights, the Zero's primary tactic. But this Hellcat did not play by the old rules. Fukui reacted instinctively, deploying his usual tactic, rolling down and attempting to use a tight turn to get the Zero behind the Hellcat, where he could unleash maximum firepower. But the unexpected happened. The Hellcat did not flee. It did not turn as Fukui predicted. Instead, the American plane suddenly climbed straight up, performing a maneuver Fukui had never seen. A wild hammerhead turn, nosing down to dive straight toward the tail of his Zero. Fukui's jaw dropped. No Japanese pilot had ever witnessed a plane more than twice the weight of a Zero climb at such an astonishing rate. The Hellcat's Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine produced 2,000 horsepower, far exceeding the Zero's Nakajima Sakaicho engine with 1,130 horsepower. This allowed the Hellcat not only to maintain altitude, but to convert its massive weight into a weapon in vertical attacks. Before he could regain his composure, Fukui realized that his Zero was under fire. The Hellcat's 6 machine guns opened up from about 400 meters, a hail of bullets surpassing any Japanese pilot ES expectations. 17 rounds struck his Zero in just 3 brief seconds. His heart raced, eyes wide, feeling the fuselage shudder with each hit. He had to execute an emergency spin, sending the Zero into a temporary loss of control just to escape the Hellcat's lethal fire. Fukui survived, but not all pilots were so fortunate. Petty Officer Second Class Masao, his wingman, did not return. The reconnaissance plane they were escorting was also destroyed. It was an eye-opening experience, the first-hand proof of the Hellcat's true power. Not the fastest or most agile plane, but a machine designed to win in ways they could not imagine. This event marked the first turning point in Pacific aerial combat. Until then, Japanese pilots had believed that superior turning tactics would always prevail. Now, Fukui and the surviving comrades realized the world had changed, and the old principles no longer worked. After the encounter, Fukui recorded in his diary, "The Hellcat was not only powerful but smart, as if it anticipated our every move. When we tried to attack, it climbed and dove, maintaining perfect speed and altitude. Its firepower was catastrophic. No doubt about it, we were facing a plane superior in every aspect." The information from Marcus Island quickly reached Japanese command centers. Officers in Rabaul and Yokosuka were stunned. Previous assessments of the Hellcat, based on intelligence from neutral sources like Sweden, now revealed a frightening reality. The American plane was not only heavy and well protected, but superior in speed, climb rate, and firepower, shattering the assumption that high pilot skill alone would be enough to win. This realization forced Japanese pilots, long confident in their personal skill and the Zero's maneuverability, to confront the limits of traditional tactics. Later battles, from Wake Island to the Marianas, would prove that the Hellcat did not need to win in conventional dogfights. Instead, it employed energy fighting, maintaining superior speed and altitude to strike accurately and then retreat, rendering the Zero ineffective. The arrival of the Hellcat also highlighted a fundamental difference in war philosophy. Japan still relied on individual excellence, samurai spirit, and pilot skill, while the United States had designed a complete system, equipment training, and coordinated tactics, creating an overwhelming strategic advantage. Fukui and his comrades, who had once laughed at the intelligence reports, now understood that the laughter had ended and a disaster was beginning. Over the skies of Marcus Island, for the first time, the Hellcat's power was demonstrated through blood and experience. A plane they had once dismissed now became a symbol of a changing game. From that moment, every sighting of a Hellcat no longer meant a simple target. It was a machine built to survive and win, regardless of the opposing pilot's skill. The encounter at Marcus Island was not merely the first battle between Zero and Hellcat. It was the first warning. Aerial warfare was entering a new era, where design, technology, and systemic tactics would determine victory far more than individual skill. Fukui, later recalling the chaos and fear when the Hellcat appeared, understood that from then on, every confrontation with the Americans would never be the same again. This was the first moment, but also the beginning of the gradual collapse of the Japanese Navy in the air, where pilots once considered elite would face a power they could not overcome with skill, spirit, or courage alone. Initial disdain had transformed into a haunting realization. The Hellcat was not just a plane, it was the machine that would determine their fate over the skies of the Pacific. In early October 1943, Wake Island became one of the first hot spots to reveal the gap between theory and reality in the skies over the Pacific. Lieutenant Yoshio, a young pilot of the 252nd Air Group, led 12 Zeros from his squadron to intercept an American attack initially regarded as minor harassment. They relied on the superior maneuverability and individual skill that had dominated air combat for the past 2 years. The Hellcat, gleaming under the bright sun, hovered high like a silent steel wall. Japanese pilots, accustomed to using turning tactics, tapping turns, to quickly bring their Zeros into firing position, still employed their old methods. But the Hellcat did not flee. It could not be baited by tight turns or head-on maneuvers. Instead, it applied energy fighting, leveraging speed, altitude, and weight to maintain the advantage, diving with devastating firepower and retreating before a Zero pilot could react. Lieutenant Yoshio watched his comrades fall one by one. When he attempted to bring his Zero close to a Hellcat, the American aircraft not only maintained its position, but forced the Zero to slow with a rapid diving maneuver, dropping altitude while firing 6 Browning M2 machine guns, each at 750 rounds per minute. This overwhelming firepower far exceeded the Zero's, leaving Japanese pilots unable to respond. Some were hit before they even had a chance to fire. The surviving Zeros returned riddled with bullet holes, and the number of dead or missing pilots continued to rise. The Wake Island engagement sent a clear message. The old formula for victory no longer worked. Dogfights based on tactical turns and one-on-one encounters were obsolete. Japanese pilots now faced a sophisticated, coordinated, and highly mobile combat system unlike anything they had ever encountered. Just weeks later, from the Marianas to Tar Lagoon, Japanese pilots continued to encounter Hellcats in various scenarios. Lieutenant Commander Tao Tanimizu, with 32 confirmed kills, was among the few who survived multiple engagements with Hellcats. In a command meeting, he warned the young pilots, "Forget everything you know about air combat. The Americans no longer fight our way. They fight like death itself, not like warriors." Tanimizu was not exaggerating. The Hellcats' tactics relied on group coordination, maintaining maximum speed and altitude, and intercepting in pairs, one plane above, one below. When a Japanese pilot dove to attack a Hellcat, its partner was already descending to strike and withdraw before the Zero could maneuver. Individual tactics and the samurai in the sky, spirit that had brought victories to Zeros, became useless and dangerous. The Hellcat system was further enhanced by ship-based radar. While Japanese pilots relied on visual observation, Americans already knew their position, altitude, and flight direction from tens of miles away. Lieutenant Sadamu Kumachi described his first experience being radar-guided. "We were climbing through clouds, seeing nothing. Suddenly, a Hellcat dove from above, precisely along our flight path. We were blind, and they could see in the dark." The crisis was compounded by declining pilot training. Before the war, the Japanese Navy required 700 flight hours for a new pilot. By early 1944, due to resource shortages and escalating conflict, training dropped to 300 hours for the Navy, 200 for the Army, with many practical exercises eliminated. Many pilots had never fired a shot in the air, flown at night, or practiced formation flying. Meanwhile, American pilots arrived with 300 basic flight hours, including 50 hours of direct Hellcat training, thousands of rounds fired, and extensive carrier landing practice. They mastered energy-fighting tactics in safe environments before facing real enemies. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, a training officer at Kasumigara, bitterly noted, "We were sending children to fight experts. They were fully trained. We didn't even have enough fuel to practice, nor enough ammunition to train. The consequences were catastrophic." This reality was starkly revealed in the Battle of Formosa, October 12–16, 1944. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukuome deployed over 700 aircraft, including the best-trained pilots, to intercept American attacks. Japanese initial reports claimed glorious victories, 26 carriers and warships sunk, 300 planes destroyed. But gun camera footage revealed the harsh truth. The U.S. lost only 89 planes, while Japan lost 329, most experienced pilots. Surviving pilots described, "Hellcats were everywhere. When we climbed, they were above. When we dove, they were below. They divided the sky into a grid, each square covered by a squadron. This was no longer combat, it was systematic destruction." During the Philippine Sea Marianas campaign, June 19, 1944, the devastation intensified. The Japanese Navy launched 450 planes in multiple attack waves, confident that pilot skill and Zero's range advantage would prevail. But Task Force 58, with 15 carriers and 956 aircraft, including 450 Hellcats, was ready. Perfect U.S. radar guidance, pilots with altitude advantage, and the sun behind them allowed attacks from Japanese blind spots. The result, 42 of 69 Japanese planes shot down in 12 minutes, while the U.S. lost only 30 in total. Some American pilots set personal records. Commander David McSell downed 7 planes in one day, while his wingman destroyed 6 more. The term turkey shoot emerged, describing Japanese planes almost helpless against Hellcats. On the battlefield, the combination of technology, tactics, and training created a disparity Japanese pilots had never imagined. Over 300 experienced pilots were killed, while survivors began to experience extreme psychological stress, later termed Hellcat psychosis, the haunting fear of facing a Hellcat. Japanese officers, such as Admiral Ozawa, observed, "They are not just pilots, they are part of a machine. Personal skill, experience, fighting spirit, all meaningless against their organized power." This crisis endured, paving the way for a complete shift in Japanese tactics. From relying on elite pilot skill, they were gradually forced toward kamikaze strategies, where the pilot's death became a weapon of replacement. By 1945, the situation for the Japanese Air Force had become desperate. The resounding victories of the early years of the war had vanished, leaving behind a force that faced Hellcats with near hopelessness. The number of experienced pilots had declined drastically, and training programs were nearly destroyed by the prolonged war and resource shortages. By early 1945, many newly graduated naval pilots had only 40-50 hours of combat flight experience, while Army pilots had 60-70 hours. With such limited capability, they could hardly execute the sophisticated tactics that had once made the Zero dominant. In this context, kamikaze tactics were born. Instead of sending young, inexperienced pilots into conventional combat, Japan decided to turn them into living weapons. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, the father of the kamikaze program, explained it mathematically. If a Zero attacked an aircraft carrier conventionally, the probability of success was nearly zero, as Hellcats would destroy the plane before it could reach its target. However, if the Zero became a flying bomb, the probability of hitting the target rose to 30%. A pilot's death now had meaning, at least from the Japanese perspective. The Battle of Okinawa, the Iceberg Campaign, April-June 1945, was a clear demonstration of Hellcat dominance. During this campaign, Japan launched 1,900 kamikaze missions against the U.S. fleet. But the Hellcat was not just an ordinary interceptor. It became a living shield protecting American forces. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, commanding a Hellcat squadron, applied a mowing machine tactic. 4 Hellcats flew in a horizontal line, 100 yards apart, sweeping through Japanese formations at high speed. Each pilot covered a sector, executed an attack run, climbed to altitude, and repeated the cycle. The result was a kill ratio of 9.51, with 2,351 Japanese planes destroyed, only 249 Hellcats lost, and approximately 80% of kamikaze attacks prevented from reaching their targets. The Hellcat continued to evolve, becoming more powerful and harder to defeat. F6F variants were equipped with water injection systems boosting engine power to 2,200 horsepower, rocket launchers that required no runway, improved pilot armor, and the K-14 sight for automatic target tracking. Even legendary pilots like Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, who had 28 confirmed victories, nearly perished when first encountering a Hellcat in June 1944. In his memoirs, Sakai recounted that despite executing complex maneuvers, loops, rolls, formation splits, the Hellcat stayed on his tail as if invincible. He survived only because the American pilot made a mistake, forgetting to jettison the auxiliary fuel tank before the engagement. In the war's final stages, the Hellcat became a decisive factor not only in aerial combat, but also in defending the U.S. fleet against kamikaze attacks. During the Okinawa campaign alone, Hellcats flew 38,038 combat sorties, destroyed 2,351 Japanese aircraft, lost 249 planes, and achieved a 9.5.1 kill ratio. Furthermore, they prevented most kamikaze planes from reaching U.S. ships, nullifying Japan's final tactic, sacrificing pilots to inflict maximum damage. Psychologically, these battles created a nightmare for the surviving Japanese pilots. Post-war records describe a phenomenon called Hellcat psychosis, the terror of facing a plane that was not only technologically superior, but fought as part of a highly coordinated system. Experienced pilots were eliminated, and young pilots had almost no chance of survival. Technological and industrial disparities also made recovery impossible for Japan. Hellcats were mass-produced at the Bethpage factory in New York, operating 24/7, producing one plane per hour, totaling 12,275 aircraft in 30 months. In contrast, Japan produced roughly 5,100 planes of all types in the entire year of 1944. Even Japan's top engineer, Professor Jiro Horikoshi, designer of the Zero, later admitted after studying the Hellcat, "We designed aircraft for 1941. They designed a system for 1945. While we polished the sword, they built the industry." The Hellcat was not only a superior aircraft, but a symbol of a complete war industry. Standardized planes, perfectly interchangeable parts, organized labor shifts, color-coded assembly guidance, and maintained quality despite high output. Victory in the air became a product of the system, not just individual skill. During the final conflict at Okinawa, Hellcat pilots continued to destroy kamikaze attack waves, protecting carriers and battleships. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia described the sweeping runs. 4 Hellcats in a horizontal line, clearing Japanese formations, climbing to altitude, and repeating like a relentless mobile mowing machine. Each sortie destroyed targets while maintaining energy and safe distance, executing a systematized effectiveness far superior to any Japanese individual tactic. The Okinawa campaign ended with devastating losses for Japan. Most experienced pilots were killed, many planes shot down before reaching their targets, and the Japanese Air Force collapsed entirely. The Hellcat proved that weight, armament, radar, training, and mass production were not auxiliary factors. They were the core of modern warfare victory. On a personal level, surviving Japanese pilots had no choice but to adopt kamikaze tactics. Legends like Hiroyoshi Nishiwa witnessed experienced pilots, including themselves, sent on suicide missions while Hellcats maintained absolute dominance. Nishiwa, who had previously shot down 2 Hellcats, ultimately died on a kamikaze mission, witnessing the unassailable supremacy of this aircraft. By August 15, 1945, when Japan surrendered, only about 100 naval pilots had combat experience left. Hellcats still patrolled airfields, demonstrating superior power. American pilots, like Lieutenant Robert Vasu, performed maneuvers, loops, rolls, climbs, that left Japanese pilots in awe. The U.S. aircraft, designed to withstand up to 13 G with engines nearly twice as powerful as the Zeros, represented the pinnacle of technology and tactics Japan could not match. Post-war analysis showed that the Hellcat accounted for 75% of U.S. Navy air victories, destroying 5,123 Japanese planes while losing only 270, achieving a 19.1 kill ratio, 13.1 against Zeros alone. These figures not only proved the Hellcat's power, but also demonstrated the complete collapse of the individualistic, samurai-style air combat philosophy that the Zero once symbolized. The war ended. The Hellcat had not only won the skies, but also redefined the principles of modern warfare. It proved that the nation capable of building superior systems, producing in quantity, and training effectively would prevail, no matter how skilled the individual opponent. Japanese pilots who once mocked the Hellcat now understood that every pound of weight, every gun, every radar device was not a weakness, but a symbol of industrial power capable of protecting soldiers and overwhelming the enemy. By August 1945, the skies over the Pacific had changed completely compared to 3 years earlier. Pilots who once prided themselves on their skills, who had mocked the Hellcat, were now reduced to inexperienced boys with only a few dozen hours in makeshift aircraft. The F6F Hellcat had completed its mission, annihilating the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service, transforming naval tactics, and proving the power of modern industry. On August 15th, as Emperor Hirohito read the surrender proclamation, the scene at Atsugi Airfield became a symbol of the transfer of power. Japanese pilots, engineers, and ground staff stood in formation to witness American Hellcats landing for the first time since the surrender. 12 F-6Fs from the USS Yorktown glided across the runway, with American pilots performing loops, rolls, and climbs that Japanese pilots had only dreamed of. Lieutenant Robert Vasu, credited with 19 victories, demonstrated Hellcat maneuvers to the Japanese pilots. Through an interpreter, he explained, "You have to understand, this is not the full power. In combat, with the water injection boost, it's another 20% stronger." From a technical perspective, the Hellcat represented the culmination of engineering, intelligent design, and superior production capability. Its Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine contained 2.84 million precisely manufactured parts, all fully interchangeable, completely unlike the Nakajima Sakai on the Zero, where each engine required manual assembly with no standardized parts. The Hellcat's durability, power, and maintainability made it an almost indestructible weapon in the hands of an American pilot. Legendary Japanese pilot Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, who had survived hundreds of aerial battles, witnessed the Hellcat's full power and recognized the profound gap. He admitted, "The Zero made Japan a naval power. The Hellcat showed us we were never as great as we thought. We thought we were samurai. The Hellcat showed we were just men with outdated weapons facing the future." The final days of air combat over the Pacific still saw tragic but intense confrontations. On August 15th, NN Clarence Moore of VF-31, flying from the USS Belleau Wood, shot down a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy shortly after 2 p.m., recording the last aerial victory of World War II. The Japanese plane was unaware that the nation had surrendered, while Moore demonstrated safe-range attack, energy management, and the Hellcat as a perfectly orchestrated system of destruction. The statistical impact of the Hellcat was staggering. From its introduction, the F-6F destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft, losing only 270 in aerial combat, achieving a 19.3.1 kill ratio. Over 305 U.S. pilots became aces, contributing 75% of the Navy's total aerial victories. On the Japanese side, of the 18,000 naval pilots at the start of the war, fewer than 100 had combat experience by August 1945. These numbers reflected not only technical superiority but the complete collapse of Japan's aerial combat system, rendering samurai-based strategies and philosophies obsolete in the face of modern production and technology. The Hellcat's victory did more than dominate the skies, it revolutionized U.S. naval tactics. Before the war, naval theory regarded aircraft carriers as vulnerable points, needing preemptive strikes for survival. The Hellcat completely changed this mindset. With a strong air defense system, U.S. carriers became mobile fortresses capable of operating off enemy coasts for weeks without fear of attack. Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Task Force 58, remarked, "With the Hellcat, we don't need to seek the enemy first. Let them come. The F-6F will take them down on our terms." This success was accompanied by a cultural shift in combat. It was no longer individual duels or the spirit of the samurai. The Hellcat embodied system efficiency, maximizing pilot survivability, and coordinated operations between radar, command, and pilots. The concept of refusing combat when at a disadvantage, central to Hellcat tactics, was unimaginable to Japanese pilots, trained to fight to their last breath. Post-war analyses from both American and Japanese sources confirmed it. The Hellcat's dominance was not merely because it was a good plane, but because it was part of a complete combat system, combining technology, production, and tactics. Captain David McCampbell, a U.S. Navy ace with 34 victories, concluded, "The Hellcat won the war in the Pacific, period. It destroyed the Japanese Air Force and made our victory inevitable." Saburo Sakai echoed, "The Zero was an excellent aircraft. The Hellcat was a superior weapon system. We didn't recognize the difference until it was too late. We brought swords to a gunfight and wondered why we lost." The Hellcat also left a profound strategic lesson. In World War II, victory was no longer determined solely by individual skill or bravery. Mass production, maintainability, standardized training, coordinated operations, and radar control were decisive factors. Japan, despite having skilled pilots, could not overcome deficiencies in industry and system design. Hellcats continued to fly post-war, serving as training assets and symbols of American technological might. Japanese engineers studied them and drew lessons. Building a coordinated system rather than optimizing a single aircraft is the foundation of modern warfare. Professor Jiro Horikoshi emphasized that Japan's focus on the sword, individual combat, while America built the industry, was the reason for their defeat. In retrospect, the Hellcat not only defeated the Zero, but also destroyed the philosophy of elite-based warfare, proving that in the industrial age, superior systems determine victory. Every surviving Japanese pilot owed their lives to decisions made by American Hellcat pilots, a testament to the absolute dominance of the Hellcat system. In later interviews, American Hellcat pilots emphasized that it was not superior skill alone, but the aircraft itself that ensured victory in a controlled, low-risk, and highly effective manner. From its initial perception as a big, heavy, ugly plane, the Hellcat overturned all preconceptions, proving that in modern warfare, technology, disciplined training, and system coordination determine everything. When reviewing the entire Pacific War, the Hellcat claimed the supreme position in aerial combat history. It was not just a tool of destruction, but a symbol of American industrial power, systematized warfare, and the complete transformation of naval strategy. Today, museums, documentaries, and history books all commemorate the F6F Hellcat, the aircraft that laughed at the Zero and toppled Japan's entire war philosophy.